Heterosexuality as norm is a social construct. Without hierarchy, it's all just neutral behavior. Hello. I'm happy to see you. I hope you're happy to see me too. Even though this is the internet and you are watching or listening to this days, maybe weeks, maybe months after I've recorded it. Maybe you're an archaeologist who's finding this in a strange archive somewhere. And I'm so sorry that I'm the one who's going to tell you about society in 2026. Or maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not sorry. Maybe you're going to learn something, archaeologists of the future. Speaking of archaeology, we're going to talk about some queer history today. So, the topic of the day is bisexuality. So it's Pride Month. I usually come in with a little bit of queer knowledge, some kind of LGBTQ history, or busting some myths, or just talking about the fact that we exist, we've always existed, and we're always gonna exist, no matter how much you wish we didn't. So first I would like to tell you about my powers as queer Midas. So queer Midas is what me and my friends call it when you hang out with Caitlin for a little while and eventually you realize you're not straight or neurotypical. There's usually both going on. So as queer Midas, once you start hanging out with me, you also start learning more about yourself because I personally never shut up about my personal explorations and my epiphanies and the way I think about things. I'm also neurodivergent Midas, as I mentioned, because there is a lot of overlap between neurodivergence and queerness, which we'll get back to that because it's something I love to explore and we'll talk about more thoroughly later. So long story short, at least half a dozen people in my life, probably more, I'm probably over a dozen at this point, have realized they are bisexual as a result of being in Caitlin's beautiful gay orbit. And I think that's pretty cool. So we're going to talk a little about bisexuality and what it is. We do have various episodes from last Pride Month that we will be linking in the show notes here because everything I'm going to tell you here kind of builds on stuff that we've already talked about. So last year I had Bailey Merlin on the show and we talked about bisexual erasure, and that's a banger episode. So we're going to link it. You should go listen to it. It's awesome. And we talk about bisexual erasure and queer gatekeeping and sort of the sense of not being queer enough. And like straight people think that bisexuals are too queer to hang out with them, and gay people think bisexuals are too straight to hang out with them. And honestly, we're all being kind of assholes about it, and we should just accept each other. That's my thesis statement. So first, I would like to address some myths and assumptions and stuff about bisexuality. The first of which is, well, bisexual, bi means two. So are you saying that there are only two genders and bisexuality enforces a gender binary? No. If you are bilingual, are there only two languages that exist? No, you just speak two of them. You sound stupid. Shut up. So the bi and bisexual means your attraction is both homo, same sex, or hetero, different sex. And that is like whether it's just a drop of I think that lady is pretty in a sea of otherwise you're pretty heterosexual, like that still counts because bisexuality does not have to be like a label that puts us into like some kind of gay assembly line where you're like, okay, well, now that you know you're bisexual, you get a welcome kit in the mail and we're gonna do this and that and you have to go to pride marches. Like, no. Honestly, this is not really coming from a queer community perspective. This is an anthropological examination of bisexuality. So because we are going more academic today, I will be using the terms like same sex and opposite sex because most of the world do indeed be men and women. And I want you to understand me clearly. And so I don't want to spend every single time I talk about this being like, people who are somewhat different than you, whether in identity or genotype or like blah, 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 blah. We know trans people, non-binary people, intersex people. It's not just man, woman. That is not a binary, but I'm going to be speaking in mostly binary language for the sake of getting my point across effectively. Okay? Okay. Another myth is that there is beef between the bisexual community and the pansexual community. And my response to this is, if there is beef, why? If you are jonesing for infighting instead of focusing on the shared communal oppression of all non-straight people, you are choosing to waste time. I don't want to talk to you. So this is why we use the term like bi plus, or sometimes like you're monosexual if you're just straight up hetero or homosexual. So being exclusively heterosexual or homosexual is also known as being monosexual, meaning I only have attraction to one type of person. Bisexuality or bi plus is everything else, right? It's omnisexual, pansexual, bisexual. There's even a bi-curious flag. Like, we've got all sorts of little nuanced ways to particularly define our bisexuality, but again, for the purposes of clarity and conciseness in this episode, I'm just going to be using the term bisexual. There are like subtle differences between bi and pan and other nuanced identities, but those differences are only as important as you want to make them. So you can literally, if you're like, oh, well, I don't know, academically, am I bisexual or pansexual? Baby, it doesn't matter. Pick the flag you like better, right? You can pick bisexual because more people are familiar with that term and it saves you time and you don't have to explain yourself as much. You can pick a label and call yourself pansexual because you think jokes about being attracted to kitchen cookware are funny. Like, literally, the world is your little gay oyster, okay? You do not have to earn the label of bisexuality. You don't have to prove it. You don't have to carry your papers. You don't have to tell me who you have dated or had sex with or kissed or daydreamed about. It's all good, baby. It's all good. Myth number 3, I think I'm on number 3, is that if you don't act on your attraction, you're not a real bisexual. And again, I say, knock it off with the weird infighting and gatekeeping. So most of us are subjected to something called compulsory heterosexuality, which means that we are raised in a society that treats heterosexuality as the default and also as the correct option. It is a morally righteous sexuality. And that doesn't make any goddamn sense, which we'll get to later. But we grow up being taught basically that like boys will marry girls and girls will marry boys. And kids can usually get an inkling that like, that's I don't want to marry a boy. I want to marry another girl or something. And then we tell them, no, that's not right. You have to marry a boy, right? We reinforce heterosexuality from birth based on social norms. This is not to say that these social norms are bad. They are neutral. That is a neutral social norm, but that also means that it is arbitrary and you do not have to listen to it. So a lot of bisexual people may be attracted to same-sex and opposite-sex people, but they don't realize it. Or they do kind of feel an attraction and then they repress that because they think there's something wrong with it. Or they explain it away and it's like, oh, I just really, really like her and want to be her friend. Or like, I really like her and I want to be like her. I'm obsessed with my best friend because I want to be just like her. Meanwhile, 20 years later, you're going to be like, oh, I was in love with my best friend. Okay, now I see it. Basically, if you keep getting treated like something is not a real option, you're going to ignore it as a real option because of norms, because somebody told you. And that's fine. You're allowed to believe what somebody tells you. But I am also here to set you free and to tell you that all of this stuff is pretty much made up. Cool. There's also then that fear of not being queer enough, right? We talked about the bisexual erasure, and some people are going to be gatekeepy, and like some lesbians don't want to date bisexual women because they assume, well, you're going to leave me for another man. This is called being a gold star lesbian, which is like you only have sex with women. You've never had sex with a man. And I think part of being a gold star lesbian, which is also a made up thing, is not having sex with bisexual women because of like the proximity of icky penises. I'm not 100% sure. And again, It's all arbitrary and made up. Like any gatekeepy stuff is simply unnecessary, because what we should be doing is just observing the range and spectrum of human sexuality and being like, oh, okay, so some people are like more into the opposite sex and some people are more into the same sex and some people are like whatever. And then there's like varying shades between that, all of which makes you queer enough to belong to this community if you want that. That's also not obligatory. You do not have to be like, I'm a member of the queer community, even if you are. The reason that queer community is so important is because LGBT people are oppressed, right? And so there's safety and power in numbers, and recognizing that your own sexuality is outside of this hierarchical norm means you can show solidarity with the other people who are othered. That also inversely means that there's safety in being straight passing. And for a lot of people who are bisexual and are going to just stuff that down and be like, no, I can't look at that butt. That's not the right gendered butt for me to think is cute. Okay, babe, that's cool. That's you over there. We don't have to talk about it. I'm here when you're ready. Okay. I love you. Queer Midas. So fuck off and let bisexuals be bisexual. Like, no matter if they have indeed touched a titty or not. You don't have to prove anything to me or anybody else in the gay community. And if somebody else in the queer community tells you that you're not allowed to sit with them, please have them call me and I will yell. Excellent. What we're not going to do is police consenting adults. Okay, awesome. One more little myth to get into is that, like, to be bisexual, you have to be like 50-50 into men and women. And to that I say, have you been listening to me? No. Even if one crumb of you found somebody of the same sex attractive one time, you are now an example of the fact that human sexuality is fluid and nuanced and a spectrum. We are not all 100% one thing or the other. Most people are some degree of bisexual just 'cause. Like, that is, in fact, the default. But we don't treat it like a default. We treat it like straight is the default, even though exclusive heterosexuality, just like exclusive homosexuality, are two extremes at the end of this bisexual bell curve. And this brings us to a little piece of queer history that I would like to discuss with you today. We're going to talk about the Kinsey Scale. And this was developed by Alfred Kinsey, a zookeeper. We'll get to that later. Hey guys, it's me from the future. I woke up in a cold sweat today, like zoologist. I said zoologist, right? No, I'm pretty sure I said zookeeper. Alfred Kinsey was not a zookeeper. He was a zoologist and biologist. Zookeeper. Not a zookeeper. Okay, carry on. Every time I say zookeeper, just remember, Caitlin is a functional adult. They totally know what the word zoologist means. Okay, thanks. In the late 40s and early 50s. So this historical model of measuring human sexuality is like one grandma ago. This is still very recent development in queer and like human sexuality knowledge. And it's already outdated. Ain't that nice? Isn't it nice that we got to have something long enough for it to become outdated? That's beautiful. Let's sit with that for a minute, okay? Because for most of our modern Western lives in the United States of America, we have been living in a world that erases queer people and gay people and doesn't talk about queerness as a natural aspect of human sexuality. Like, homosexuality was a criminal offense. There have been sodomy laws, and we're going to talk about sodomy. I'm so excited to talk about sodomy. Quote me, Caitlin Fisher, June 2026. Sodomy. Okay, so the Kinsey Scale presents the spectrum of human sexual orientation on a 6-point scale. Technically a 7-point scale, but one of those is X, which means you don't have sexual attraction. So we got a little bit of ace representation going in the 1940s. Which is pretty cool. We can sit here and appreciate that. I personally love it. So if you are a 0 on the Kinsey scale, exclusively heterosexual, straight up straight. If you are a 1, you have a little crumb of interest in same sex. So this might be somebody who calls themselves like bicurious or heteroflexible, somebody who is mostly attracted to the opposite sex, but has occasionally considered being a little gay. Perfectly acceptable. One great example is one time my mom told us a story that she was trying to make a boyfriend jealous at a bar and kissed another man and his girlfriend just to make a point. That is Kinsey 1 behavior, right? That's like, it's not my usual thing, but I'll try it. Kinsey 1. A Kinsey 2 is a little bit more into that bi-curious area. So maybe somebody who feels like mostly straight just because they haven't really thought about it. Maybe occasionally dabbles in some same-sex activity, a threesome, experimenting in high school, whatever. Cool. That's a Kinsey 2. A Kinsey 3 is the mythical 50-50 bisexual who is like, oh no, everyone is so hot. Kinsey 4 is basically a Kinsey 2, but toward gay, the gayer direction. So you're mostly interested in the same sex, but occasionally you may be attracted to somebody of the opposite sex. 5, you are pretty damn homosexual, but you might have a heterosexual experience if the right person came along, right? If your favorite actor shows up, like I think a lot of lesbians, who are the lesbians into recently? I don't know. I was going to say like, you know, nobody's that gay. Like somebody who's just like so amazingly hot that you're like, I need to get with that person regardless of what's going on downstairs. So that's, I think Chris Hemsworth. Do the lesbians like Chris Hemsworth? It's fine. It's great. Okay. So an example of this is when I was doing Slutty Caitlin Volume 1 after leaving my abusive marriage. I hooked up with somebody who had always identified as gay, but in a thought experiment realized like he wasn't necessarily opposed to vaginas. So he like tried it out. Still pretty gay, but like, you know, willing to friends with benefits a vagina. It's cool. It's fine. It's whatever. And then the Kinsey 6 is the exclusive homosexual. So you are only attracted to people of the same sex. Obviously, there's some problems with the Kinsey scale. So issue number 1 is that it's very simplified and linear, and human sexuality is not this simple or linear. We now have a lot more research and evidence that gender identity and sexual identity are very layered, nuanced, fluid. They change over time, and that's part of it. The Kinsey scale also assumes that gay and straight are opposites, and that you can be like 80-20, 50-50. Like, it's not necessarily if you are more straight, you are less gay. Like, it's all bisexual, and then the extremes on the ends. And it's not necessarily like a 1-to-1 inverse. So we're like mathematically quantifying gay versus straight. Third major problem with the Kinsey scale is that he did interview over 11,000 people to get the sample data, but they were near exclusively white middle-class Americans. So we do not have a good look at like overall through different cultures, backgrounds, races, etc. We don't have that like global view of sexuality. This was a very narrow sample population. Good quantity, but does not capture nuance. So pretty much the good thing about the Kinsey scale is that it's like a decent entry point for explaining that human sexuality is a spectrum, has a wide range, right? It's not just straight or gay. It's not just normal or weird. Like when you can contextualize the Kinsey scale, you see there's more going on here than just yes or no, 1 or 0, the 2 binary options that we think it is. I'm also going to bring back the fact that Kinsey was a zookeeper, zoologist. So you might think he has no business making a scale that describes human sexuality, but I'm very pro Kinsey being a zookeeper, zoologist, because humans are in fact animals, and he cataloged animal behavior over human social norm behavior. So he is looking at a population of one kind of animal and organizing his data based on that. So, speaking of animals, there are over 1,500 species of animals that exhibit bisexual and homosexual behavior. We can link to the Wikipedia article where I read about this in the show notes. And maybe one day we'll do a deep dive there, but I want to keep us on Kinsey as much as I can. So some people like to pretend that sex is just for procreation, and those people are repressed and deserve an orgasm. So I'm not necessarily volunteering, but I will help you find somebody who can give you an orgasm. I've got lots of friends. You deserve nice things. Sex is pleasurable, and there's nothing wrong with sex being pleasurable. Even among the animal kingdom, some animals have sex for pleasure. Most of them have sex for procreation because they have baser instincts, right? Smaller brains. The brain doesn't have as much room to frolic and find new ways of rubbing their genitals together that might be more or less pleasant. But there are a few species that do have sex for pleasure. I believe dolphins and bonobo monkeys. They also kiss for pleasure, which I love knowing. I'm like, oh, the bonobos are coming for us. I hope they come up with some kind of technological advancement and they can fight us about something. I just feel like we haven't had a good consequence in a while for our actions. So even among animals, heterosexuality is not the one and only way. Procreation is not the one and only way. And it is really silly of us to expect that humans of all animals would be exclusively heterosexual. Like, we have big brains that are wired to seek pleasure. Like, one of our main drives is finding stuff that feels good. So yet we're going to touch each other and figure out the ways that it feels good to touch each other. That's just animals, baby. That's just animals. Okay, next up, I would like to revisit the idea that straight is the default, because we only treat straight as the default because somebody told us to. If nobody ever told you that, this would not be an issue. Everybody would just be like, oh, everybody's a little different. Everybody's a little interested in something a little different than each other, but it's all fine. So we usually have a patriarchal religion come in and teach us what is good and holy and what is bad and sinful. And so we are going to pull this lovely little quote about sodomy to talk about heteronormativity. So the Abrahamic religions, like your classics, have traditionally affirmed and endorsed a patriarchal and heteronormative approach towards human sexuality, favoring exclusively penetrative vaginal intercourse between men and women within the boundaries of marriage over all other forms of human sexual activity, including autoeroticism, masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, non-penetrative sex, and non-heterosexual sexual intercourse. That was too many sexuals in a row. And all of these things that are not, you can put P in V if you're married, have been labeled sodomy at various times. And so oral sex, sodomy. Masturbation, sodomy. Anal sex, sodomy. We knew that one. But oral sex as sodomy, that's crazy town. Masturbation as sodomy, that Kellogg guy was crazy. Did you guys know that cornflakes were invented to make people masturbate less? Look it up. So the church, these various religions talking about sodomy, generally believe and teach that sodomy is forbidden because it is sinful, and it is sinful because it is derived from the behavior of the residents of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a story in the Bible. I'm going to be honest, I haven't read the OG Sodom and Gomorrah. I feel like we are probably misinterpreting and misusing it. I'm going to go with that. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into every religion's take on sex because I want to keep us on Kinsey and bisexuality and the fact that most people are bisexual. But I do just really want to point out that, like, if we just call anything that we think is deviant sodomy, like, what does sodomy even mean? Like, sodomy is a social construct. Caitlin Fisher, June 2026. Also, religion is personal. It's communal. There is a religious community, but it is a mythology, right? A belief system like any other. And it is not obligatory. It does not mean that you bulldoze somebody else's worldview and install yours because you think it's better. That is crusader behavior, and that is largely regarded as fucked up. So we're not going to do it. Okay? Keep your shit out of my face. I'll keep my shit out of your face. It's great. Honestly, I don't think there's any argument against the acceptance of human sexuality as a spectrum that does not boil down to, well, a man told me it was bad and wrong. I am pretty sure it all comes down to that. And that does not hold up in court. Not the court of Caitlin, not the court of Judge Judy or Judy Justice or whatever she's called now. So what happens when we don't approach sexuality from this heteronormative framework? So right now, heterosexuality is king of the hierarchy. It is seen as morally better than queerness because it is pure or something, because God said, don't know, social construct. Heterosexuality as norm is a social construct. Without hierarchy, it's all just neutral behavior. So without this framework of being like, oh, well, there's normal people and then there's deviant behavior, because it's all just aspects of sexuality. Okay? Oh my God. We just observe that most people left to their own devices without shame or fear-based instruction from a patriarchal system will seek pleasure while exploring different kinds of bodies throughout their lifetime. But Caitlin, why don't we have more of these observations? Because the patriarchal systems that are currently in a flailing death roll destroy, discredit, and suppress this information as soon as they can. Right? We talked about this last year, episode 167, called Why We Are 60 Years Behind on Queer Rights, is about Magnus Hirschfeld and the Institute for Sexual Science in Germany that was raided and burned by the Nazis. So there goes a bunch of history about queer and transness. There's also the defunding of queer research, right? So Kinsey's own report on female sexuality so scandalized the world that he lost funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. And that's for saying that, like, women experience lots of different sexual orientation and activities. Gasp. Disgusting. Unfund him. Defund him. There's a word for this. It's defunding. We can also see it in frickin' 2025, 2026, right? The Trump administration wasted no time. Well, they're wasting our time. But they cut grant funding for like anything DEI related, right? Anything about racial issues, anything about sexuality or gender ideology, right? Gender identity study, anything about intersex, literally anything that was not cis, het, white, it got the axe. So we lost all this grant funding, and that is on purpose because the patriarchy does not want queer history to get a foothold, because that starts to damage their story that queerness is a strange aberration and a deviant thing, which it's not. You want to talk about deviant things, we can talk about Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and a lot of Republican lawmakers and a lot of Catholic priests and a lot of youth pastors, right? Like they want to talk about protecting the kids, and then they make a nonsense bullshit case that queer people are the danger to kids without ever having to back it up, because the system itself upholds straightness is correct and default. Queerness is deviant. If we let the deviants around our children, they will make our children into deviants. I'm so sorry it is that easy to lie to your face. Get well soon. We also just straight up ignore the fact that a lot of historical figures were openly involved in same-sex relationships. So we're talking Isaac Newton, Socrates, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Leonardo da Vinci, Emily Dickinson, Tchaikovsky, Andy Warhol, Alexander Hamilton on the $10 bill, Langston Hughes, famed poet. Like, there's a lot of queer people just in plain sight, and we choose not to acknowledge their queerness because we can't have you knowing that queer people have impacted society. That would tell you that maybe they're normal and okay. Ew. Okay, so there's obviously like the systemic erasure issue, and then there's colonialism and genocide and all of that, right? So I've talked before about Indigenous Americans recognizing different sexuality and gender identities, like two-spirit. There's like sort of a third gender, and often they are considered like very special people in the tribal culture. Like they represent something spiritually important, but those identities faded away as white settlers came in and started imposing their own values and ideologies on the indigenous tribes. So they just come in and they're like, we're going to teach you about misogyny and white supremacy and force you to exist under those paradigms. Give me your corn. Here's a smallpox blanket. #besties. Do you ever get sick of white people even though you're a white people? That's me a lot. Anyway, okay. So the reason that we don't have a lot of information to pull from about the ubiquity of human sexuality and bisexuality and queerness is because it has been intentionally deleted from our archives, right? And when we do make a big fuss, like me on my little podcast talking to 400 people being like, so gay people have been here forever. Oh my God. Like, people will just come and fight me and be like, you're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. And to that I say, you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about, which I know is an objective fact. And you are operating on the assumptions of Donald Trump, who is literally falling apart as we speak, Fox News, which has been proven to constantly lie to you, and religious leaders who I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw because they make shit up and they hurt kids a lot of the time. Anyway, cool. Back to this. So if the Kinsey Scale is imperfect, which it is, which everything is, we cannot perfectly capture the nuance of every aspect of human sexuality, and we shouldn't seek to. We just need to observe and update our knowledge base. And we currently don't really create any non-traumatized queer people in the United States, just like we don't produce any non-traumatized autistic people in the United States, because from birth, we are told you are fucked up and maybe deserve to die and go to hell. Get your shit together or get out, right? That says happy family values to me, personally. So let's briefly look at some alternatives to the Kinsey Scale that have developed since the 40s and 50s when this first came out. We have the Klein grid, which is usually like the next step that people take. They're like, I like this better than the Kinsey Scale. So the Klein grid explores, I think, 7 different variables: sexual attraction, sexual behavior, sexual fantasies, emotional preference and social preference, lifestyle, and self-identification. So each of these variables is considered separately and also in 3 different contexts: past behavior, present behavior, and the ideal. So maybe you experimented with your sexuality as a teenager or in college or something, and you're like, yeah, no, I tried it out. I've never really fantasized about men, but I tried it out just to see if I was maybe gay or queer or whatever. And in a world where we don't shame that or be like, ew, gross, bro. Oh, you've touched a peen. It's just an aspect of human sexuality that everybody does. Calm down. I'm angry. Anyway, so maybe you experimented in the past. These days, not so much. And ideally, you're like, I think ideally I would like to settle down with a wife heterosexually. That's fine. You can want that. You can want whatever you want, as long as it is not like a fucking crime against humanity. Cool. Then we have the Cell Assessment of Sexual Orientation, also called the SASO. It is sell like you sell something at a yard sale. So this was developed to continue building on existing models, adding some more variables and nuance. So the SASO is going to measure sexual attraction, sexual orientation identity, like how you self-identify, and sexual behavior all separately. So one of those criticisms of the Kinsey Scale was that we were just like, oh, well, you're gay or straight, or you're somewhere along the percentage of gayness and straightness. And Kinsey included, I think, attraction and behavior together. So the Cell assessment considers those separately. And like attraction is different than behavior. Like you can be really attracted to somebody and choose not to date that person, especially if you are a repressed bisexual who's in the closet because you go to youth camp and they're like, no. Also, you should read Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. It's a banger. And it is about like religious, like conversion therapy, kind of. It's great. You should read it. It's also gross. Somebody vomits up a bunch of flies, so keep that in mind. Then we have the multidimensional scale of sexuality, or the MSS. This is another nuanced one that has questions about sexual behavior, attraction, arousal to erotic material, emotional factors, and sexual dreams and fantasies. So a lot of these like newer ones are trying to get into like sexual interest and attraction as opposed to behavior. Sometimes they all align, sometimes they don't, usually because you're trying to choose straightness in a world that rewards straightness, even though you have these attractions and feelings and fantasies. Set yourself free, baby. Come hang out with me. You're bisexual. It's fine. I'll get the welcome kit. Moral of the story: most humans are bisexual. Deal with it. The hierarchy of sexuality and heteronormativity is made up. Deal with it. And the patriarchy does its best to erase and damage queer knowledge and community, right? We're not going to deal with that. I'm just going to keep talking forever and ever and ever. And the cherry on top, if you think sexuality is a choice, you're bisexual. Okay. And if you're attracted to me in any way, you're a little bit gay because I'm non-binary. All right, y'all. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Coach, they'll change your approach and tell you a joke to lighten your load and help you along or sing you a song. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do.